Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 842 of the Juicebox Podcast. In March of 2021, on episode 452, I had an enlightening conversation with Francisco Leon, who's a doctor, a PhD, and the CSO and co-founder of Provention Bio. At that time, we were talking about the Teplizumab trial. That trial must have gone okay because the FDA approved the drug, which is now called Tzeild, and that brings us to today's episode with Leni Ramos. Leni is the Chief Medical Officer of Provention Bio, and she's here today to talk about Tzeild. You're going to love this conversation, I promise. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your medical plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you are inspired to help with type 1 diabetes research today, you can do so by helping T1D Exchange. Go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox, join the registry, and fill out their survey. There is a lot to be excited about in this episode, so sit back, relax, and settle in. Get those earbuds in, nice and tight. Are you doing the dishes? Are you driving? What are you doing right now? If you have questions about insurance coverage for Tzeild, there'll be a statement at the end. I'll read you a bunch of information that will help you. That'll be at the end of the episode. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored today by Cozy Earth. Whether you're looking for sleepwear, bedding, or towels, Cozy Earth has you covered. And they cover you in the softest, most comfortable material I think I've ever felt. When you make a purchase at CozyEarth.com using my coupon code JUICEBOX, you will save 35% site-wide. 35% off of everything you buy from Cozy Earth. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it later, but for now, just know this. Never, ever, ever have I slept on more comfortable or lovely sheets. CozyEarth.com. And don't forget to use the code JUICEBOX at checkout. Today's podcast is also sponsored by the insulin pump that my daughter wears, Omnipod. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Head there right now. Make no stops. Do not pass go without going to Omnipod.com/juicebox and getting started today with either the Omnipod 5 or the Omnipod DASH. Omnipod.com/juicebox.
Hello, my name is Leni Ramos. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Provention Bio, and I'm very delighted to be here to speak with Scott and share some of our insights and response to some questions related to Tzeild.
Cool. So we're calling it Tzeild now because it is FDA approved, but when it was in trial, what was it called?
So during development, the medication was called Teplizumab.
I just wanted you to say it because I always say it wrong. That's all.
Okay.
And I wanted to make sure people knew what we were talking about.
Okay.
When you come, when do you come into the company? I guess is my question.
So it's a kind of a convoluted story. I came into the company in 2017. And at that time, we were a group of 4 people. I joined Ashley and Francisco. But you may or may not know that I have had a history with Teplizumab dating back in the early 2000s.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you first intersect it?
So back then, I was working for a group called the Immune Tolerance Network. It was based out of UCSF in San Francisco, the Bay Area. And I worked under the direction of Jeff Bluestone when he set up the ITN, we call it the Immune Tolerance Network, ITN, at UCSF. And one of the products that was being investigated in this group is Teplizumab.
Was it being investigated back then for the reasons that it came to market?
Indeed.
Yes.
So at that point, I think probably the second clinical trial in type 1 diabetes was initiated with the Immune Tolerance Network after it showed, promising evidence from an earlier study conducted by Kevin Harold. And of course, mouse studies prior to that, indicated that there was quite a promising activity in type 1 diabetes. As you know, the drug was developed for something else before type 1 diabetes, but we'll keep going if we want to keep it going in that direction.
Exactly. Okay. So from a layman's perspective, I think of the drug as, I'm going to tell you how it strikes me. You tell me if I'm right. You have, we're going to need to get some screening set up so that people can get screened and get found out in time. And then if it seems that you're going to develop type 1 diabetes, this drug slows that process. Is that correct?
So, as you know, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. So the way, and we're understanding about the biology of the disease, is that people who have this autoimmune disease develop autoantibodies against components of the beta cells, the pancreas, the insulin-producing cells in the body. And once you develop at least 2 of these type 1 diabetes-related autoantibodies and abnormalities in the way you can control your blood sugar, we call it dysglycemia, then you may be eligible to receive Tzeild to slow down the conversion to clinical or insulin requiring type 1 diabetes. Now, remember, of course, with a drug like Tzeild, we have to be cognizant of the important side effects, right? And that's also noted in our label. That includes, cytokine release syndrome, serious infections, low blood counts, specifically what we call lymphocyte counts, and less common hypersensitivity or allergic reactions. But I think you have pretty much the big picture covered, Scott.
Okay. So I've been seeing it spoken about lately in ways that I didn't previously think about the onset of diabetes as being in stages. Can you describe the stages to me?
Yes. So I think we're learning more and more about the disease, and it's a continuum, right? Because you have a set amount of beta cells in the pancreas, and over time, you lose the ability to produce what we call endogenous insulin. And so there are 3 stages, as it's been characterized. Stage 1, where you have the development of 2 autoantibodies, but you have perfect control of your glucose. And then the next stage, stage 2, you will continue to have at least 2 of these autoantibodies, but then you have the inability or people have the inability to control their blood sugars. We call dysglycemia, but they still don't need insulin. The first 2 stages do not need exogenous or, supplemental insulin. But then when you get to stage 3, this is what we call overt hyperglycemia, is when there's not enough beta cells or functioning beta cells left in the body. And so you need some supplemental or exogenous insulin. Those are the 3 stages. But they are, it's a continuum, right? Because whereas we say there are different stages, in different people, these stages may be different in terms of the amount of beta cells remaining in the body.
Is it appropriate to get the drug in any stage?
So the current indication, the one we got approved for, is for stage 2, meaning you have at least 2 autoantibodies and you have evidence of dysglycemia. Mm-hmm. You may be aware that we are conducting a study in stage 3, newly diagnosed within 6 weeks patients, and these people are in a trial called the PROTECT study, and we hope to have a readout on that study in the second half of this year.
Wow. And still, no matter when you're jumping into it, the hope is to slow things. So not to stop, or is there anybody who's still on it who's never developed type 1?
So the data that I can share with you is what's in our label, mm-hmm. And that the people who got the Teplizumab or Tzeild, these are individuals with stage 2 T1D, had a delay in their onset of type 1 diabetes compared to people who did not get it of 25 months. Now, as you might imagine, we and others are very interested in figuring out in the future, who are doing better with the treatment, and that is we don't have quite the data available to tell you who those individuals are, but we are very keen on understanding who these individuals are. And the other thing that we might consider doing in the future is additional dosing. We've been asked by some folks whether that might help in the future. We don't have any data on additional doses, but it's clearly something that we would be interested in pursuing in the future.
This is off topic, but I've just had a brilliant marketing idea. You guys need to get a T-Rex, a dinosaur, and give it a shield. And that shield would be the Tzeild. I'm just saying. I feel, and that's a free idea. Leni,
I think you hit the nail on the head with respect to what we're thinking about as a shield to T cells. Yeah.
I don't think you need to. I don't need anything back from this. Just send me a sweatshirt when they get made. Okay, that's a great idea.
Okay, Kaylin, we'll take note.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I want to understand right now, like real time, how are you finding people who are eligible? Like, because I imagine people can walk around in stage 1 and stage 2 and not know it, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit a really, really important question. And I'd really like for us to talk about the idea of screening, because that is how we're going to find patients, right? So in the context of screening, now, I know you probably know a lot about this. It's evolving. Screening, even before Tzeild was available, screening is important because, number one, it prevents the onset of, it doesn't prevent it, but you can avoid the onset of diabetic ketoacidosis. You know, that's a very life-threatening condition.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you know you're at risk, then you can help prepare and plan for transitioning to insulin use in the future. Mm-hmm. Third, how are we able to do the TN10 study? That is the basis of the approval. It's because we were able to find patients who participated in studies, right? In TrialNet, for example, they have been being followed in TrialNet, and they were able to join the study. And as you know, this resulted in the trial results. And then finally, now that we have Tzeild, we can intervene in this disease. And it's not just us, it's the beginning of other treatments that could help patients with stage 2 disease. Now, how are we going to find patients? Well, like TrialNet and how the study was enrolled in TN10, the lowest hanging fruit are the people who have relatives with type 1 diabetes, because such individuals have a 15-fold increased risk of developing type 1 diabetes. So, as you might imagine, the people who are going to be the early, the people who we can prescribe the drug to are probably relatives of people with type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And so whoever is interested should probably be thinking seriously whether they should have the autoantibody testing. But they only represent 15% of the population. The other 85% are the general population. And so how are we going to find them? There's a lot of thinking going on, driven by diabetes associations. For example, I can mention that the ISPAD, the International Society of Pediatric and Adolescent Diabetes, have within their guidelines, these are evolving again, that people, for example, who are at age 2 and age 6 are ideal times where you should be testing for autoantibody, because they provide the best predictive value in a public health setting.
Really?
Yes. Or the other thing is you do a risk-based approach, which means that there are people in whom you understand that they have a genetic risk, and then you are kind of enhancing your screening to those individuals. But all of this is evolving, and right now, we think that probably the most likely initial candidates for the drug are going to be relatives of people with type 1 diabetes. But it's all about education, Scott. Not just education because of us, because education because of the 3 reasons why we should be trying to find these patients.
Right.
There are a lot of benefits for identifying these patients early, and then we have to find a way to be able to transition this to a general population screening, because the vast majority of the people who are stage 2 are out there and they don't know about it,
Right.
as you already alluded to.
No, yeah. I mean, I find myself saying this a lot. My daughter Arden began wearing the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump on February 4th, 2009. That was 5,093 days ago. Or another way to think of it, 1,697 pods ago. At that time, she was 4 years old. Hang out with me for a moment while I tell you more about the Omnipod. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Today, Arden is 18 and still wearing Omnipod. Back then, there was one choice, just one pod. But today, you have a decision to make. Do you want the Omnipod 5, the first and only tubeless automated insulin delivery system to integrate with the Dexcom G6? Because if you do, it's available right now for people with type 1 diabetes ages 2 years and older. The Omnipod 5 is an algorithm-based pump that features Smart Adjust technology. That means that the Omnipod 5 is adjusting insulin delivery based on your customized target glucose. That's helping you to protect against high and low blood sugars, both day and night, automatically. Both the Omnipod 5 and the Omnipod DASH are waterproof. You can wear them while you're playing sports, swimming, in the shower, the bathtub, anywhere really. That kind of freedom coupled with tubeless, a tubeless pump. You understand it's not connected to anything. The controller is not connected to the pod. The pod is not connected to anything. You're wearing it on the body tubelessly. No tubing to get caught on doorknobs or anywhere else that tubing with those other insulin pumps can get caught. Omnipod.com/juicebox. That's where you go to find out more. You may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH. You should check that out too when you get to my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. So if you're looking for an insulin pump that is tubeless, waterproof, and automated, you're looking for the Omnipod 5. If you want to do it on your own and you're not looking for the automation, Omnipod DASH. For full safety, risk information, and free trial terms and conditions, please also visit omnipod.com/juicebox. I'm sleeping on sheets right now, this night. When I'm done here, I'm going to take a shower and go to bed. And when I do that, I'm going to be crawling into bed and sleeping on sheets made by a company that has been on Oprah's favorite things list for 5 years running. That's right. These sheets are made by Cozy Earth. Cozy Earth offers bedding, loungewear, towels. They have what you want. There's a Valentine's Day snuggle up coming up. What is this? We gonna snuggle up for Valentine's Day on some Cozy Earth sheets and accessories? What a great idea. You can snuggle up this Valentine's Day in Cozy Earth's best-selling bamboo sheets. They're a great gift for yourself or for a loved one. But while you're on the website, check out the pajamas and the towels and everything else. CozyEarth.com. Now, why am I telling you about this? Well, I mean, it's an ad. But because there's also a code at checkout that you can use to save 35% on your order. What? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's that Scooby-Doo sound? Right? 35% at CozyEarth.com just by using the code JUICEBOX at checkout. This can't even be true, can it? Well, it is. Go check it out. All their products come with a 10-year warranty, and their bedding is temperature regulating and is available in viscose bamboo and in linen. I have the bamboo stuff. So head on over to CozyEarth.com and use my code at checkout, JUICEBOX, to save 35%. There are links in the show notes of the podcast player you're listening in now, and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Cozy Earth, Omnipod, and all of the sponsors. I tell you this because when you use my links or my codes, you're supporting the show and helping to keep it free for everyone. I appreciate it when you click. I do work with T1D Exchange, and it is incredibly difficult to get people to do something even when it takes almost no time and it's only beneficial. And I just, as you talk about the importance of screening, all I can think is, how do you get somebody to do this thing? Is it as do you go the direction of trying to get like the pediatric societies to just add it to testing that they suggest to people? Do you direct mail to people? How do you get someone to know about a thing that they might not even know about? Do you have ideas so far?
Well, probably a simple thing to do now. If you have, first of all, probably the people who would be interested at this moment to do that are people with relatives who have type 1 diabetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of even think about screening? There's TrialNet that can be contacted. There is through the JDRF, the T1 Detect, where you could ask for a test to be sent at home, and you can do the finger prick at home, and you send the test back, and they can do the initial screening. And if it turns out to be something that you need to follow up, you are recommended to follow up with your physician. So, but there has to be a little bit of motivation to do this, right? And so if you are a family member, you would hope that because you have a 15-fold increased risk, that you should really figure out if you or anybody else in your family has it.
Yeah. Well,
now for general population, I'm sorry. So general population is going to be a bit more of a challenge, I think. But it's all about education. And, I'm hoping that even if you were to, it'd be in a room of 100 and you get 2 people to do it and they spread the word, and hopefully some of that is going to be infectious and keep going. Mm-hmm. And we get this to be more widespread. The issue with the pediatrician adding this to their, kind of battery of tests to do is we're not there yet. I really do think that the Diabetes Focused Association will have to really make identify the path to doing this, agree upon the actual guideline, and then hopefully it will be discussed with the general pediatric physicians, right. And that's how it's going to happen, I think.
Okay, so when we find this person that gets screened, can you walk me through the whole process? So the screening is just like you just said, a finger prick. You could do it at home, or you could probably have it done at a lab, I would imagine. But then what's next? They find the antibodies, and then how does the whole process kind of ramp up? Of course,
I think the best thing to do is to speak with your doctor. But if you look at some of the guidelines that are starting to be developed, that's divided into 2 categories. If you have a family member who has type 1 diabetes and you got a result that was positive, you probably will have to undergo a kind of more of a regular screening, if you would. Now, what's regular screening? Some would say it could be as often as 3 months, could be annually, and it depends on what stage you are. If you're in stage 1 or stage 2, and again, this is something that between the patient and the doctor to decide the cadence by which the monitoring should be done. Now, if you were in the general population, depending on your age, because the younger you are, diabetes is a disease of younger people. Again, the frequency of testing or retesting is going to depend upon a number of factors. So, I can't give you the formula for every individual, but you should speak with your endocrinologist if you have access, or at least a general pediatrician who can refer you to an endocrinologist to understand the risks. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. Are we at a point where this is also new? Could I run into a situation where my endo just doesn't even know what I'm talking about yet?
It's very possible, because I think things are evolving. Even the concept of staging for some people is still novel. Mm-hmm. And so it's starting with you and your group and your audience. It's things like this that's going to be the nidus that will help us teach people all across, from patients to parents to clinicians to endocrinologists to general, doctors.
Right. Well, okay. So at the moment, is this a thing that my insurance would cover? Would I be paying cash for this? Or how was that part handled? Hey, everybody, this is Scott. I'm editing the show right now. And this thing happened. I asked that last question, and I was asking an insurance question, but I wasn't very clear. And I realized later that Leni answered a different question, but I wanted to get you an answer about the insurance stuff. So I reached out to Provention. They sent me a statement, and I'm going to read it for you right now. And then we're just going to pick right back up in the conversation. I have a little message here from Provention Bio about insurance. I'm going to read it to you as they wrote it. While we are still in early stages of discussions with payers, the feedback we, Provention, have received so far from insurers has been overwhelmingly positive. We encourage patients that have been prescribed Tzeild who have questions about insurance coverage to call 844-778-2246 for specific questions, or you can visit tzeild.com/patient-support for more information about our patient support program and Provention Bio Compass. Provention Bio Compass is a program that helps patients that have been prescribed Tzeild gain access and provides education and resources related to Tzeild. This includes administration of our copay assistance program for eligible commercially insured patients. I know I just said our, but again, I'm reading it in their voice. Just remember that. Copies of our enrollment form, along with other documents and information that may be helpful to practices, such as our Compass billing and coding guide, sample letter of medical necessity, and others, can be found under the Patient and Practices Resource section at tzeildhcp.com. That last part was for physicians. I think we're all clear now, and let's go right back into the conversation.
The other thing I must add is I just have some feedback that insurers, I believe, are warming up to the idea of funding the tests. And also, as you may be aware, we have a Compass program that is a support for patients, insurance coverage, copay. And so this is another avenue to see whether support can be obtained in that fashion.
Okay. I ask because it's my expectation that when this goes out, you're going to hear from a number of people who probably just had a child diagnosed recently and they have other children or, something along those lines. And people are going to be interested when they make their way through the process. The actual introduction of the drug to you, it's done through, it's an IV infusion. Is that correct?
When the patient is deemed to be stage 2, and their doctor prescribes the medication, they can access this Compass program that will help again with insurance and copay, as well as how the infusion environment is going to take place. Mm-hmm. And it is a 14-day treatment given intravenously for at least 30 minutes. 14
days in a row.
That's 14. It's 14 consecutive days.
Days. Okay. Is there effort to change the delivery method or to add delivery methods, or is this the only viable way?
Currently, the drug is approved for intravenous infusion, but as you may imagine, Provention is interested in looking at other routes of administration, including, subcutaneously under the skin. So this is something that we will hope to pursue in the future. But right now it is an intravenous infusion.
Okay. Your background, I was doing a little bit of digging around, and have you been paying attention to things related to inflammation for a lot of your career?
So I am a transplant nephrologist by training. And so the early part of my career has been in the development of drugs that intercept the immune system so that we can prevent the rejection of organ transplants, not just kidney. I've been involved in other solid organs, including liver and heart. So indeed, yes, I've been involved in immunology for a while.
I spend a lot of time talking to people who have type 1 and other autoimmune issues. And I always kind of come back to the idea of like inflammation seems to be at the core of so many things, even to the point where the more people I interview, the more people I meet who have type 1 diabetes, other autoimmune issues, and then things like bipolar disorder or depression or other things that seem that when you dig around online a little bit, you hear people talk about them kind of in the same breath with inflammation. And I was wondering, do you, in your opinion, do we even see the big picture around how impactful inflammation is on people?
Wow, that is $1 million question. What I can say right now is that, the treatments that I've been aware of are directed against components of the immune system, whether they be T cells or B cells, and diseases like type 1 diabetes and perhaps other autoimmune diseases could be targets of T cell directed treatments. Now, whether there are relationships or connections to other diseases beyond our traditional understanding of immune diseases is another field that I probably am not the right person to address.
I understand. I will say, obviously, it's anecdotal from me, but I do this thing when I interview people. I ask about autoimmune and their extended family. And then after enough time, I started saying, how about anybody with bipolar disorder? And the amount of people who can find somebody in their reasonably extended family with bipolar, it as an example, is shocking to me sometimes. And people mention things over and over again that are repeating. And it's just hard to ignore when you're talking about it like that.
I'll certainly take note of it and see, if I can understand the connection myself.
No, I just wanted to bring it up. Okay, so I have some questions here for you. Can we kind of roll through them a little bit?
Sure.
All right. So are there people who are not candidates for Tzield?
Scott, probably the easiest thing is to say who are the candidates.
Okay.
So they're type 1 diabetes, stage 2 disease. They have to be 8 years and older to be eligible for Tzield.
Mm-hmm. That's it?
That's our indication.
All right. Are there any long-term repercussions from the drugs, or the reasons why maybe the trade-off wouldn't be valuable in some people's opinion?
Well, definitely we need to be aware, and this is in our label of the warnings and precautions. And I'm going to absolutely make you aware that we do have cytokine release, serious infections. This one type of white blood cell called low lymphocytes could be decreased with treatment, and less commonly hypersensitivity or allergic reactions. Common side effects are headache, rash, again, low blood counts. We don't have sufficient long-term follow-up, and this is why we have a commitment with the FDA to do a what we call a registry, where we follow patients for at least 10 years. And so we're going to build a database of these patients to see long-term effects. But so far, in our roughly 1,000 patient database, we have not seen any things that we are typically concerned about, like malignancies and so forth, and that's been discussed during our AdCom as well. But the FDA did say that the follow-up is still kind of on the short side, so we will be definitely looking at longer-term follow-up.
That's excellent. Are there any drug interactions, things that I can't be using if I'm taking the infusion, and does that count just for during the infusion, or is it outside of theirs?
Typically, monoclonal antibodies are so specific for their target that there are minimal kind of what you would be worried about when you're taking, for example, pills. But the most important things that you should not be having if you take this drug is anyone who has an ongoing infection will potentially have an allergic reaction to some of the components. If that has happened in the past, of course, you have to be careful and avoid it.
Okay. All right. I mean, 14 days is a lot of days. What happens if in the middle something happens and I just can't make it one day? Does that interfere, or do you just skip that day and go to the next?
So as per our label, if you miss a dose, the recommendation is to just keep going to the next day or whenever the day that you can resume, and to finish the 14-day course. So, if you skipped one day, instead of, 14 days, you're going to get your 14 doses over 15 days, for example. But it's highly recommended that the patient finishes the whole 14-day course.
I have a question here from a listener that said they're looking for guidelines about routine screening for like siblings, for example. This person said that they asked their pediatrician to test their son this year for antibodies, and the pediatrician said no, they would only do a urine glucose test. Is there guidance out there that somebody could point their endo to?
Yeah, definitely. There, as I mentioned, the ISPAD guidelines, the International Society of Pediatric and Adolescent Diabetes, who are formulating these guidelines. And a urine glucose is a very, very insensitive way of detecting a risk for type 1 diabetes. And you really have to go to autoantibody testing right now. That's probably the best way to start identifying individuals who are in these pre-symptomatic stages of type 1 diabetes.
With that autoantibody testing, is there a frequency? I mean, should I be doing it every year, or like?
Again, these guidelines are evolving. If you're a relative of someone with type 1 diabetes, your frequency may be a bit faster, right? But first, it depends. If it's negative, depending on your age, you're a certain cadence. But if you already have an autoantibody, it may be more frequent. I think this is the things that you have to discuss with your endo or doctor to see how often these tests should be performed.
Yeah, my daughter is the one with type 1. I have a son and a daughter, and my daughter was diagnosed when she was 2. She's 18 now. And my son, around 10 or 12 years old, was tested and had no antibodies. And I have to admit, it gives you this sense of like, oh, okay, well, then that's never going to be a problem. But I don't know that that's true. And a lot of the testing sites don't want to test again if you've come back with no antibodies. So it's an interesting, you get put in an interesting, there are a lot of people in this scenario, right? There's TrialNet, for example, and JDRF with their T1 Detect, and then there's the company that makes the drug, and then there's the endocrinologist that hopefully will, suggest this to you and help you prescribe. And there's just a lot of pieces that, to me, feel like they're not connected well yet. Is there a thought in your head that there needs to be a central base that connects all these things together?
Yeah, I agree with you. It seems fragmented, but I also look at it as an opportunity, right? We are all in the middle of this, and we're going to help create the future for people with pre-symptomatic diabetes. I think we're going to have to go and do kind of a multi-pronged approach right now, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
There are TrialNet, JDRF, we'll have to, there'll be a coalescence of all of this. And I think my sense is it's going to be the diabetes associated societies, because, we want to have somebody who are leaders in our field. This is their, kind of their expertise, and to really understand the evolving data, the historical data, to really provide us some guidance. But remember, guidance will change as well, right? Because the more information we have, we're going to change it. But right now, I think, you as somebody with family members with type 1 diabetes are going to be the most, probably are going to be at the forefront, because you have, the interest of your family to drive you to learn more. I have to say, and you may be aware that most autoantibodies are developed during the early before the age of 5, for example, and that's borne out with your daughter that developed at age 2.
Right.
So the farther out you go, I think there may be potentially a window there that there's less of a risk. It's never zero, of course. And that's why, as I mentioned in the ISPAD guidelines for general population screening, the most predictive period is in the first 6 years at age 2 and at age 6, right? To try and find these children who may be at risk for developing.
Can I ask,
T1D?
And maybe you don't know, but why is that? Why are those ages and that range the most predictive?
Because historically, that's when T1D autoantibodies occur in this population. Okay. This is historical data that has been generated by people even not here in the US, but people in Europe, in Germany, in Finland. People who've been doing routine screening and understanding the kinetics or the profile of these antibodies. They seem to appear in the early part of life, and they will manifest themselves. That's why the most common age group for the onset of type 1 diabetes between 10 and 14. So these antibodies occur early in life, and then it takes time for you to manifest the disease because, the beta cell function starts out normal and then decreases over time.
Are there people who have these antibodies and will never develop type 1?
So if you look at this, and these are published data, for example, Dr. Insel published some of this autoantibody historical data, that if you have only one, your risk is lower than somebody who has at least 2 or more. Mm-hmm. So it is possible that somebody who has a single autoantibody may not develop diabetes at all, but it's upon this individual to keep following whether it will increase over time.
Yeah, but if you have 2 or more, it's very likely going to happen.
If you have 2 or more, it's almost 100% lifetime risk. That's correct. And when you're at stage 2, your risk is 75% at 5 years.
And these antibodies, there's nothing, I know this is a little more like kind of touchy-feely, but there's nothing a person could have done to stop this from happening. Is that correct?
There is nothing a person could have done to stop this from happening. Exactly. Most likely there's a genetic risk that we can't erase from our genes, correct? And a trigger incites it. And we need to go about our lives, and we don't know what those triggers are. Some people think they're viral triggers, and it's, and that's something that we encounter day in and day out. So as you said, there's nothing an individual can do to ever avoid developing T1D, but there is something you can do if you have 2 autoantibodies and dysglycemia right now, as we talk about.
And this is the only thing that you can do right now. Am I correct? Like FDA approved Tzeild it. Is that correct?
Tzeild right now is the only drug approved for stage 2 type 1 diabetes. But as you might imagine, there's a lot of other treatments and immune modulators that are being tested. And we hope that they will be coming as well in the future, because like any disease, you need an armamentarium of treatment to be available for patients.
When Francisco was on, he spoke about inoculating people against Coxsackie virus. And I thought that my daughter had Coxsackie right before she was diagnosed. So obviously that hit me pretty hard. But just the idea of there's this common virus that children get, and if you have these antibodies, it could push you into type 1. And just to give you one more chance not to be in that situation, maybe for a little longer. I do wonder if my daughter doesn't get Coxsackie, is it just the next virus that gets her? Or could she have been diagnosed as a teen or longer? Like, it's really, obviously no one knows, but it's interesting to think about alternative ways that really don't have anything to specifically do with type 1 diabetes to avoid type 1. I just thought that was really interesting.
If you will give me 2 minutes, this is really why I joined prevention back in 2017. I was very intrigued with the concept of a vaccine to prevent type 1 diabetes. And so it is a very interesting concept. There's a lot of data suggesting that it is an important trigger for type 1 diabetes. And, we have a lot of ways that we're going to study and intervene in this disease, from, people with stage 3, stage 2, stage 1, and even before that with potentially this vaccine. And I know you're going to ask this, potentially people with long-standing type 1 diabetes, how we can, with a beta cell replacement, islet cell replacement, could be in the future.
Maybe that's even a great place for pediatricians. Like if a child has Coxsackie, which is colloquially known as hand, foot, mouth disease, if they had that, maybe that would be a great reason to do a screening. I wonder if there's a way to get into that idea, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, ideally, if we could vaccinate people early on, so they already have the protective antibodies, then this avoidance thing might be less of an issue. But it is a very fascinating, situation to try and understand how we could deal with these external triggers, and how we might avoid certain diseases. There's some diseases that have viral implications. So it is a very interesting field, I would say.
Right. Okay, I'm going to try to use my last 20 minutes with you here. Kind of, I won't get so thoughtful. I'll just ask the questions and let you answer them. Are there any clinical trials that are still happening? And if so, for what ages? Right.
So I think we already talked about the study in stage 3. That's the PROTECT study. Mm-hmm. And we'll hopefully have a readout by the second half of this year. The other study that's ongoing is what we call the TN10 extension. And these are people in the original TN10 trial that if they develop stage 3 clinical disease, they are eligible to enroll in the study to receive a course of Teplizumab. We also are planning to start a study in stage 2 patients in younger than age 8. This is actually what we call a post-marketing requirement, and we would have done it even if the FDA didn't ask us, because there's such a need for younger people to be able to delay the onset of clinical disease. As you know, if you develop type 1 diabetes for the age of 10, there are studies that suggest that the long-term survivorship is decreased. So we need to be able to intervene at the younger ages.
Is there any thought that you might be able to use the drug on recently diagnosed people who are already on insulin?
So that's the premise of the PROTECT study, really.
Okay.
These are people who are newly diagnosed, and some of them have already started insulin, and so that's what we're going to be testing. That's what we are testing, and hopefully see the results again by the end of this year.
Are all of the ongoing trials double blind? Are some people receiving a placebo?
So the PROTECT study is a double blind study. It's a 2-to-1 randomization, which means that of every 3 people who entered the study, 2 received active and 1 received the placebo. Our TN10 extension is an open label, and everybody gets active drug.
That's good.
And in our pediatric study that we're going to start very soon, everybody will get an active drug.
I find that encouraging. Are there any trials planned for people who have had type 1 for some time?
So I think what you're referring to potentially is beta cell replacement.
Right. Is that something else the company's looking at?
Oh, You may or may not know this, but Teplizumab was tested in cadaveric islet transplantation in the early days of clinical development, and showed some promising data back then of people becoming free of supplemental insulin. So we would be interested in looking at Teplizumab in the setting of longstanding type 1 diabetes, in the setting of replacing beta cells. Absolutely.
This is out of left field, but do you think the drug has any place with transplant patients, people who get new pancreases, but oftentimes have a reoccurrence of type 1?
That's a good question. I was hoping you were thinking whether it would be of a benefit in transplantation in general. And that's really how I got to this drug, because of my transplant background. It's interesting because the drug, as we know it, is intervening in the autoimmune side of type 1 diabetes. And it's possible that in the setting of the beta cell transplant, it's looking at both the autoimmune as well as what we call the alloimmune, which means that it's somebody coming from somebody or somebody else. So you're trying to protect the islets from two types of immune attack. But yes, I think those are things that we need to, we're very curious in studying if and when we get funding to do that kind of interesting work.
I think a blend of how well you understand this and how intelligent you seem, plus the very calm nature of your voice. When you told me it was a good question, I was very proud of myself. I felt silly for a minute. I was like a child. I was like, oh, it was a good question. Excellent.
No, you have great, inquisitive minds are so special. You cannot not be inquisitive, right?
No, especially around all this. You would consider this the dawning of a new era, right? Like this is kind of cutting edge stuff, right?
Well, the drug has been in development for a long time, Scott, right? Over 20 years. But I mean, given the fact that the only thing available really for patients with type 1 diabetes is insulin, which replaces a very, very important thing that people don't have. But now you have a treatment that actually intervenes at the core of the disease, the immune attack on the insulin producing cells in the pancreas. I think it's novel. It's we think that this is a kind of drug that modifies the disease, and frankly, it's about time, right? Because all other immune-based diseases have had their share of very, very important drugs. Rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, psoriasis. And so I think, while we're very, very, how can I describe the feeling? So happy and proud, I think we just opened the door. I think that's the most important thing. I know this because I come from a transplant background. A lot of diseases require more than one treatment, potentially, or a different, another type in case the first type is not suitable for this individual. We have to have options in a armamentarium, as I said earlier, to help patients.
Is there a hope in your heart, at least, that what you learn here will bleed into other ways of treating people for other things? Like I think of something like you would think is simple, but hives, for example. There are some people who get hives and there's no reason for it. And very recently, right, there's been 2 drugs out that impact that. And I'm wondering, do you think is this a shift in the way people are thinking about immune issues? And do you think it can do you think the success can start to replicate on itself and fold over and over? Or do you think it'll be 20 more years before we hear something else? That's a big question.
Let's break that question a couple of ways.
Yeah.
The drug binds to a specific receptor in T cells. And so there are a lot of other diseases that are T cell mediated, right? So it's not just type 1 diabetes. And so it's possible, although we don't have data for these, that other immune-mediated diseases could benefit from a treatment like Teplizumab or other T-cell directed treatments. You name them. There's multiple sclerosis, even psoriasis, celiac disease. So many of these things are potential targets for a drug like Teplizumab or other T-cell mediated diseases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for type 1 diabetes, I think we've opened the door for others to not only see that they could be successful. Talking about the other drug developers who may have focused on other diseases that are easier to treat or have more people to treat. But this is a very important disease, and once you've opened the door, there's a way. I think it's going to be. We may be the first, but we're not going to be the last.
Yeah. Does gut health fold into that idea somehow, or am I connecting two things that don't connect?
You mean, is there a relationship between gut microbes and immune diseases? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
I'm sure there is. There's a lot of literature out there about the microbiome and how they influence the immune system, and I'm sure there's a gut talk.
Yeah.
But that's probably as far as I'm going to discuss.
No,
I'm stopping right now.
That's fine. Okay, so I have some last questions here that are mainly from listeners. So they're going to fall under the category of, I know you need to be careful but not to say anything that's not true. So I want to be clear. These things are not approved, or they'd be completely off label if they were, but they're still questions people ask. So the first one is, can it help people who do not have any of the genetic markers, so no autoantibodies, nor have any family history, yet are currently being treated with insulin and diagnosed with type 1? Do you see a value for that person?
I was, that's an interesting question. Of course, we don't subscribe or recommend any usage outside of our label. But, when those types of individuals who do not have autoantibodies, and these are, mentioned also in guidelines called idiopathic type 1 diabetes, who don't make insulin, but it's not immune-based. We studied people with immune-based disease, right? Autoantibodies. And we've got to learn, do more research on these individuals. And so, it's hard to tell, what the response would be. But if it's not immune-based, this is an immune modulator. So you can imagine it's probably not, I don't think they're potentially the right type of treatment.
Okay. So then here's a question that seems like would follow some sort of common sense, but then not be, probably have no basis in reality. But I saw this one a lot. Like, if the infusions are holding off the development of full-blown type 1 diabetes, why not just continue to give them? Wouldn't that prevent it altogether?
Indeed. Same question in our minds. Although we don't have any data, we're also keen in trying to understand whether additional courses of treatment could, make the delay even longer. So it's an important question that we also want to get additional data.
Okay. Will there be any off-label use of the drug for phase 1 patients?
Again, we don't subscribe to or promote the use of Tzeild for those patients, but we also know we can't control clinicians and doctors. So we certainly don't have data on stage 1 patients, and it would be something that we would consider doing additional studies in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I need you to quit your job and come back on so I can ask you the question again. Here's a fairly long one, but is there any research in patients who did not have antibodies but have dysglycemic episodes, like direct family history of T1 and borderline A1C? So it goes on to say that my understanding is that all T1D stages have antibody requirements, but a small segment of T1s are diagnosed without antibodies.
Yes, I think as we alluded to before, I mean, we're talking about classic type 1 diabetes, autoimmune based with autoantibody development. And so people who don't have autoantibodies may fall into this rare idiopathic type of diabetes, and that is not patients that we studied in our trials.
Okay. So here's a question. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
I think probably the most important thing, and maybe we can reiterate it, is that how you, your audience, and the village of other people who got us to this stage really need to find a way to promote, enhance, evolve the screening, because not only for our drug, I mean, to delay the onset of clinical disease, but to prevent diabetic ketoacidosis, which could have long-lasting effects for people, to be able to prepare how to use insulin in the future, and potentially to continue to find patients so we can continue to do studies to be able to find new drugs are going to be critical. The other thing about the delay, right now we say, okay, people, I believe, and you believe, that 2 years is an important amount of time to be able to have freedom from insulin. Mm-hmm. But consider this: in 2 years' time, there could be other things that we have available to us that can continue potentially indefinitely to help us delay this disease. So, again, it may not be Tzeild. It could be some other combination or some new treatment. So we just have to be looking at it from that perspective.
Do we need researchers to hear this and to try to dream about what they could try with the drug as well? Or is that something that the company does internally and that's the only way it happens?
That's not the only way it happens. I'm hoping that that we listen, and we're a type of company that lives on collaboration. And so we don't necessarily have all the brain power in within the company, and we definitely need to benefit from the additional innovative thinking of other individuals, and hopefully it's not just drug companies, it's academic investigators, and even some patients may have some great ideas. So no, we're happy to listen to recommendations and to see what's the best way to continue to improve treatment.
Is there any wondering in your head if somebody who gets the full course, could they have benefits that they're not aware of? As an example, like, what if I'm going to get Hashimoto's? Is there a world where, Hashimoto's, right? It's my immune system attacking my thyroid. So is there a world where Tzeild helps with that as well?
Again, if you have a T-cell mediated disease, and this is a T-cell modulator, it's possible that there could be a benefit, but we don't have any data. As you know, for example, some T1Ds have celiac as well. So that would be a very interesting place to take and study Tzeild or Teplizumab in the future.
Does the drug have a half-life? Is there a time it's like, so I don't understand the monoclonal antibodies completely. So is it gone at some point, or is it a modification? And so then its impact is always with me?
So two things. There's the blood levels of the drug, and the half-life is about 4 days. And we say that between 5 and 6 half-lives, so 20 to 24 days, you should not be able to detect any more Teplizumab in the bloodstream. So that's one. Now, then we talk about what we call the pharmacodynamic effect of the drug, which means did it do something to be able to have a more durable effect? And that's probably what we're seeing, right? Because we only gave the drug 14 days, and we have this delay in the onset of the disease that we see with the trial. And so those changes and they are described in our label of the drug having what's called a partial agonistic effect and increasing the amount of what we call regulatory T cells. These are cells that help dampen down an angry immune system and an increase in what's called the exhausted T cells are probably changes that are helping in the delay in the onset of type 1 diabetes.
Okay. I have a couple quick ones I'm going to try to get through. I don't know how quick they're going to be. Let me just do this first. People wanted me to say thank you, so I'm going to get that out of the way so I don't forget at the end. Are you looking for approval in other countries like Australia, Canada, etc.?
So right now we haven't formally gone into any other country aside from the US, but yes, we have keen interest in being able to make this available for other patients around the world.
Mm-hmm. Then my last question is this, and I don't know what I'm saying. This person said amino acids 234 and 235. Who came up with that idea, and can they adopt me?
So the if you might remember, Jeff Bluestone actually took an earlier version, if you would, of this anti-CD3 molecule, and that molecule was modified in the amino acids were modified in this location, as you mentioned. And what happened is that it decreased the activation that the original molecule was doing, an unwanted activation. So that's the genesis of this question. And yes, indeed, it's what made Teplizumab what it is today.
Wow. I tried to make you laugh 3 times, but the words amino acids got you. I think this says a lot about who you are, Leni. I tried to be ridiculous twice, and you were like, I'm not falling for that.
You're doing a great job, though.
Thank you. Can I ask you one more? Just as going out the door, it's just a question from a person that said that they saved their child's cord blood. They are a type 1 diabetic. The children aren't. And they just want to know if you think that there might be any value from that in the future for cures or treatments.
So I'm imagine that they're thinking about using those cells potentially for like beta cell replacement. There are other learned and experienced people in that field. And it's a very important new era because we're going to bookend this disease. We're going to prevent it from the beginning, and we're going to treat people with longstanding. In my mind, I think that's where the field is going to go. And these beta cell replacements, whether they're autologous, meaning they come from somebody else, or autologous meaning coming from yourself, or allogeneic, which is coming from somebody else. These are going to be important research that we're doing. And there are some companies, and I'm not going to mention them, that are at the forefront of beta cell replacement. And I think those are probably the right companies to go to and explore what types of stem cells are going to be appropriate for future treatment.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I feel like it goes without saying, but you can come back anytime and talk about whatever you want to, because this was cool. I want to thank Leni and, of course, Provention Bio for coming on the show today. Another terrific episode with them. And I'd also like to thank Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod DASH and the Omnipod 5, and remind you to go to omnipod.com/juicebox to get started today. Get that Omnipod 5 or the DASH. It's up to you. And are you ready to sleep on some seriously nice sheets? Put on some comfy snuggles? Do it at CozyEarth.com. And don't forget to use that checkout code Juicebox to save, again, I can't believe I'm saying this, 35%. That's 35 cents of every dollar. It's insane. I don't even know why you're still here. I'm going to go get some pajamas right now. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I did. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please find a way to share it with someone. An email, a text message, graffiti on a wall. I shouldn't say, dude, don't graffiti on the wall, but you could put hang up a sign, right? It's like, I don't know, what would the sign say? Now, that's probably a waste of time. Just tell people that you know who you think will like the show. I think that's maybe the best way to spread the word. I think, hanging signs would probably take too long.